Witi Underwater was made by Te Pūrongo Productions for Te Reo Irirangi o Aotearoa, with support from Te Māngai Pāho.
Mānawa mai e te rangi i runga nei. Mānawa mai e te papa i raro nei. Mānawa mai ngā mākuru ki runga ki e nei taurā, ki runga ki e nei tau i rā. E te wāhi ngaro, uhia mai tō koutou korowai aroha, tō koutou korowai manaaki, kia tau iho ko ngā tō mai rangi ata whae ki runga ki a mātou. Hei ārahi, hei tohu i a mātou, ki te tika, ki te pono, ki te rangi Māori e. Kia tūturu e rangi, kia tūturu e papa, kia whakamau ai kia tīnā.
Tīnā, haumi e,
hui e, taiki e.
So catching up, a young man has finally, after 9 years, achieved his Bachelor of Arts. His father has said to him, never mind, you got there, but even the tortoise didn't take this long. You have reached, the pinnacle of success as a young man.
Witi Underwater is talking about one of his early pieces of writing, a short story from the 70s.
And so they're outside the town hall where his father sees, quite fortuitously, an old woman from the iwi who's passing. And so he says to her, oh, Nan, why don't you come here and meet Witi? Except that, of course, it's not Witi in the story. And so she comes up and she says to him...
Just quickly, while Witi finds the page, Adam Dudding here.
Sorry about this.
And catching up, the story Witi's about to read from is from his book, The New Net Goes Fishing. Right, he's found it.
This is him, Dad said to the old woman, and he gets his degree tonight. The old woman nodded. Ah, she breathed. Ka pai e tama, ka pai. Kua unei koe ki tēnā taumata o te mātauranga. Jimmy could not look away. He saw a flicker of puzzlement cross quickly over the old woman's eyes like a shadow. I'm sorry, he answered. I don't understand. I don't understand, Māori. He looked at the old woman again. She took Jimmy's hand as if to comfort him. She smiled and pressed his hand with a great and firm gentleness. Never mind, she whispered fiercely. Never mind. Congratulations. Anyway, boy. So all my life I have actually been engaging in this kind of problematic of growing up within the Pākehā world.
Korau mau mahara te kai patu o te rā waki o te pāpauri nō reira tēnei te
Koinei te maramata Māori e te whānau, ka pai koinei ngā kohu.
E te hapa ira.
Ringa pakia, wai takahia e kino
He Māori ahau, e noho Māori ana, ki tōku ao Māori.
Uriranga, tēnā koutou, kia rā mai tātou kato.
Ko Witi Underwater, tēnei. A 5-part podcast about what happens when a kaituhi rongonui, a literary legend, is thrown in the deep end. Wāhanga Tuarua, Episode 2, Te Tohorā. The New Net Goes Fishing. That collection was written in 1977 when Witi Underwater was in his early 30s. It was his 4th book and his 2nd short story collection. And it was a big change of direction from the stories in his first book, Pounamu Pounamu. Where Pounamu Pounamu was a kind of celebration of the rural Māori world of Witi's childhood, things turned darker in The New Net Goes Fishing. There's more of an edge to a story like Catching Up, which is digging into the pain and trauma of the loss of language between generations, and also the personal angst Witi felt that perhaps he was climbing the wrong potama.
So the quality and the atmospherics in this book are different from that in Pounamu. This one is centred in Wellington, and so therefore it covers the rural to urban migration. And therefore, it seems more to do with engagement of Māori with the Pākehā world.
But actually, even if you look back at the sunny innocence of the Pounamu stories, written 5 years earlier in 1972, young author Witi Underwater is already writing about intergenerational language loss. It's just that it's slightly off to the side. Like in the story One Summer Morning, about a boy who's going through puberty.
12 going on 13, and things were happening to him. He was growing hair in different places.
So it is a story about the stirring of young hormones, but it has a scene where, just quietly, the reader realises there's a young Maori boy here who actually can't understand his own parents when they speak te reo Māori.
The boy has been asking his parents if he can now have a pair of long trousers, because now that he's 12 or 13, he feels that he should be dressing as a man. And his mother and his father begin to discuss, well, should he have these pants or should he not? And then his sisters are also listening into this conversation. And so they say, well, we'd better kōrero Māori. Yeah, there's too many big ears around. So that is a kind of subtle but potent dig at the use of Māori within Māoridom.
Witi Underwater's writing is famously autobiographical. Again and again, his books return to Waituhi, the actual village on the east coast where he grew up. There are characters that are direct analogues of Ona Krani, me Ona Kroa, his grandparents. There are characters that are basically Ona Mātua, his parents, and Tōna Whānau, his family. The Jimmy character of Catching Up, who's embarrassed by a kuia over his lack of reo, quite simply, that's Witi. And much later, when Witi decided in his early 50s that it was time to come out publicly as gay, he published the novel Nights in the Gardens of Spain with a central character who, just like Witi, was a married father with 2 daughters who's been leading a double life as a gay man.
Coming out was associated with a lot of pain and yet a lot of strength, because I've always known what I wanted to do. And it was just a matter of timing when I then decided that I would express myself as a gay man.
But also, like any writer, Witi is constantly thinking about language, both the English, in which he's enormously proficient, and te reo Māori, which connects him to te ao Māori, the Māori world and tōna ohinga, his upbringing, to his tūranga waiwai, his standing place, to his whakapapa and maunga and waka and iwi, to his tūpuna, to Hawaii. Each of these, te reo Pākehā me te reo Māori, stand alone with their own mana, but e kōrero ana ngā reo e rua, tētahi ki tētahi. The 2 languages sometimes speak to each other, like with the origins of Witi's own name. Let's start by hearing Witi's pepeha again. Ko rongo ke tātou i te wāhanga tuatahi. We heard it already in episode 1.
Ko takitimu te waka, ko ōkahu atu te maunga, ko te waipāua te awa. Ko waituhi taku kāinga, ko rongopai te marae, ko tēria pere te wahine, ko Witi Smiler ahau.
Catch that? Witi Smiler. A bit like Ihimara, but different. This is a name that has passed through 3 different languages, one of them twice.
My grandfather, his name was Pera Punahamoa Ihimaira Smiler. And his father was Ihimaira Te Hanene, Ishmael the honey gatherer. So he came from a ringatu background in which those really beautiful and florid names came out of the Bible.
Ishmael is from the Hebrew. Ihimara, that's a Maori transliteration of Ishmael, so we're up to 2 languages so far. Anyway, like he said, Witi's grandfather was called
Pera Punahamoa Ihimaira. And the missionaries in those days would say, so your name is... They had difficulty with it. And so they said, oh, well, why don't we just call you Smiler? And so from that time on, we've always been known as the Smiler family.
But when Witi Smiler was about 15 and it came time to fill in the forms for his school certificate exams, he decided he wanted to reclaim the older version. He just didn't mention it to his family. In Māori Boy, one of Witi's memoirs, he writes that when his mother looked in the Gisborne Herald for his school C results, she couldn't find his name, so he had to tell her, look under I for Ihimaera. Here was a boy whose parents could talk over his head in te reo Māori because they knew he wouldn't follow what they were saying. And this boy, a few years later, would drop out of his Māori papers at Auckland University. This boy wouldn't get round to signing up for a language immersion course, Rumake Reo at Takiura, for another 65 years. But even then, that 15-year-old could still see the power in keeping the journey between languages moving, from Hebrew to Māori to English, but then back again ki te reo, Ishmael, ki Ihimaera, ki Smaila, ki Ihimaera.
The name came from missionaries who couldn't be bothered or who didn't want to embrace the difficulties of the reo. So it's rather ironic that I'm learning it because I will be forcing everybody, as I have actually by using that name Ihimaera since the time I was 15, to understand where I stand, and I stand in te reo.
Oh, and those school C exam results? Witi writes that when his mother finally found them in the paper, under I for Ihimaera, he'd got bang on 200 marks in total, a bare minimum pass.
Tērā te paki o Matariki, ka rewa ki tōna taumata, hei whetū arahi i te mauri o te kīngitanga. Kei taku kīngi, moe mai ki te uranga tētaka, ki te moenga te whakaarahia. Kia eke rā te tongikura, nāua no i o haki ki te iwi, kia Māori te tū i te ao, i te pō. Tau ārā i te pō, tītoko ko te ao marama. Ko te ariki nui kuini ngā waihono i te pō, ka eke ki te ahurewa, i waihotia mai o na mātua tūpuna. Rire, rire hau, pai mārire ki te whare kauhi ariki. E te tai whakarunga, e te tai whakararo. Ko ngā mihi o te ngā kau e pari atu nei, ki ngā kōawawa o ngā marae kāinga huri noa i te motu. Nau mai anō ki tō tātou kōnai i purangi, e ki anei ko Witi Underwater. Kia rukuhia e tātou ngā wai o whakaaro, o aria, o pohewa, o māramatanga. Kia korikori ai a hinengaro, kia kipakipa ai a whatu manawa, kia miria ai a wairua i te mahi a te pene me te huatau. E te iwi, i nā noa atu te hirahira o ngā kōrero, hei aru atu mā tātou i tēnei hōtaka. Ara, ko te koro nei hana tērā, ko te ao tuhi hoki tērā.
That was a mihi addressing Matariki and the Kingitanga succession, written and performed by Te Ao Mihia Tumai, who is the mātanga reo for this podcast.
I've always remembered this lady who went into Whitcoulls and she asked, oh, I'd like to have a book by that, and the person who was serving her said, she said, that Maori writer? And the lady said, yeah, the one that's called, oh, you mean Witi Ihimaera? Yes, and I'd like to have that book called, and that's the way it's always been.
So that's Witi speaking to the TV arts show Kaleidoscope in 1982. He's reminiscing with interviewer Gordon McLaughlin about Pounamu Pounamu. Pākehā might not have been able to pronounce the title of his first book, but they still wanted to buy it. Witi was in his late 20s when Pounamu Pounamu was published, but he was already a kaituhi long before that. In his memoirs, he writes that as a boy, when he awoke from his moimoia, his dreams, he'd scrawl what he could remember onto his bedroom walls, eventually covering them in a spider web of kupu. But he was also writing on more conventional surfaces, like papers and envelopes. By the late 1960s, he was sending stories off to radio stations and magazines and literary journals. Then, from 1969, things accelerated. The Listener magazine accepted several stories.
Almost one a week, because I was writing that fast.
Witi sent the manuscript of what would become Pounamu Pounamu to publishers, and he was also making submissions to the high-minded literary journal Landfall. And I have a personal interest in this part of Witi's story, because Landfall was edited out of the Caxton Press in Christchurch by a young publisher called Robin Dudding. And Robin Dudding was my dad.
Your father was the editor of what was regarded in the 1960s and 70s as being New Zealand's top literary magazine. Nobody but nobody could get through and be published unless you were the creme de la creme of New Zealand literature. So all of the big names were there. So I thought, I'll send him, your father, this particular short story. It was called Variation on Omega, which has never ever been published, and for good reason.
I haven't heard of it, I'll confess.
No, but it was about a Māori tribe in the South Island. A nuclear war had happened in the Northern Hemisphere, and Māori were having a fight with Pākehā over this last bastion. Well, he looked at it, thought it was crap, and sent it back to me. So I sent him another one, and that one was about a Māori tribe, Ngāti Porou, who were trying to save their mountain. And again, he rejected it. At the same time, I was writing this novel, which turned out to be tangi. So I sent it to him, and that one he felt was looking okay, but he didn't accept it. So I actually got on a plane and went down to him. He worked in Caxton Press. I banged on the door and he didn't open it, and so I did this haka on the doorstep. Kamate, kamate, kaora, kaora, kamate, kamate, kaora, kaora, tēnei te tangata, puhuru huru, nāna ne whakawhiti te rā, haupane, kaupane, haupane, kaupane, whiti te rā. Well, the haka actually does also reference the hairy man.
That's the tangata puhuru.
And so your father, he was a pretty hairy man. So it appeared to be quite relevant.
Anyway, the hairy man.
And he looked out the window, saw what the commotion was, and then I told him who I was. He said, oh, well, short story short.
Short story even shorter, that chapter from Tangi was published in Landfall. And when my father Robin lost his job at Caxton a bit later and started his own literary journal called Islands, Witi continued to offer him stories there too. They were good friends. I have fuzzy memories, as a little kid, of this nice man called Witi who'd visit us from time to time, and he and the other adults would talk and laugh quite a lot. Which is perhaps why I didn't feel too shy about getting him on the phone to ask if we could make a podcast about him. Anyway, that was a bit of a dudding digression, but the real point is this. Witi Ihimara's early writing career took off like a rocket. His books kept getting reprinted. He kept winning prizes, which meant he could roll out this singer on Sharon Crosby's interview show after winning the Wati Book Awards.
A friend of mine rang up and asked for Wati Ihimara.
And at the same time as all that, he had another career entirely running in parallel, partly due to the buzz around Pounamu.
The American ambassador to New Zealand was on the same plane as Norman Kirk, the Prime Minister, and he mentioned that he had this book and would the Prime Minister like to read it.
So apparently Norman Kirk read the book and liked it enough that he picked up the phone to the Secretary of Foreign Affairs, who, as it happens, had just received a report criticising the lack of diversity in New Zealand's diplomatic corps.
And so I was one of a number of Māori who were asked to come in and to rectify that huge error.
Witi Ihimara, now a published author and an international diplomat, was posted first to Canberra, Australia, where he saw how Indigenous struggles were playing out in another colonised country.
A friend of mine turned up in her little red car and took me up to the top of the mound where they were building the current Australian Parliament buildings and sitting with Aboriginal protesters while a full moon was shining down, singing waiata of anger and sadness to the world for the taking of sacred Aboriginal land.
He was a diplomat until 1989, and for some of that time wasn't actually writing, but over the decades there have been many more books, more awards, more honours. More fame too, especially because of something that started when Witi was in New York in the 80s.
My name is Pakia Apirana.
When he was still a diplomat for Aotearoa.
And I come from a long line of chiefs stretching all the way back to Hawaii, where our ancient ones are.
Well, the real story is as fantastic as the story itself. I was on 33rd Street and Broadway, and a whale came up the Hudson, almost to my building. And as soon as I saw the whale, I started to think about the whale mythologies that I'd grown up with.
Like the story of Paikea, who rode his tohorā, his whale, from Hawaii to Aotearoa. There's a teko, a gable carving, of a tohorā with Paikea on his back on the wharenui at Whitireia Marae in Whangārā, a settlement just 30 kilometres as the tui flies from Witi's east coast kāinga of Waituhi. So, in 1980s New York, Witi has whales on his mind, but also
my daughters were coming for vacation, and our practice had been for me to give them a gift, either a poem or I'd write a story for them. So I wrote this particular story.
That story was The Whale Rider, a novel about a girl from Whangārā who's named after her ancestor Paikea, but has to prove to her very traditional koro that as a girl she's even worthy of that ancestry. And there is, of course, some whale riding. Witi says when the book first came out in 1987, no one much noticed.
I think that there were 2 reviews.
But some years later, a TV executive who'd just made a very successful reboot of the Black Beauty story was on the hunt for another horse plus girl yarn and turned to a scriptwriting colleague, and she said,
well, I don't know another story about a horse, but I do know one about a girl who rides a whale.
Which is why a few years after that, in 2002, the world fell in love with a hit movie directed by Nicky Caro about a whale and a girl called Paikea and her grumpy koro.
Whiria ngā taura here tangata o Paikea kia pakari ai te iwi. Each one of those threads is one of your ancestors, all joined together and strong, all the way back to that whale of yours.
In 2024, as Witi studies te reo in the Rumaki akomanga at Takiura, te tohorā, the whale, is still playing a big part in his world.
Well, every year, so Rumaki reo, we get our tauira to create he kākahu.
This is Charmaine Hansey, kāko of Witi's akomanga. We met Whaia Shah in Wāhanga Tuatahi, but we didn't hear her pepeha. So let's get a proper introduction.
He uri tēnei no Waikato Tainui, mania poto anō hoki, Ngāti Naho, Ngāti Kino Haku, ko taupere te manga ko Waikato te awa, Waikato te iwi. I tupu ake au ki meremere, I ke raina au ki te kariti o te kauwhata, ka pakeke ake, ka whānau tamariki, ka toko te whakaro me ako ahau I te reo Māori. Ai, koenei ahau, Charmaine Hansey tōku ingoa, Mauri ora.
Kia ora. So as Whaia Shah was saying just before her pepeha, each year the tauira of Rumaki design their own kākahu, clothing, so a hoodie and so on.
And we like to wear it down to koronei hana. Ka pai ana, so I guess it's our tohu motu hake mo tēnei tau.
It's their distinctive design, just for tauira of Rumaki.
Well, we had Papa Witi, so of course we were, hey, pātau atu kia Papa Witi.
And Whaia Shah came up to me and said, so would you do it? And I said, well, I'm not a designer, I'm a writer.
But actually, he's a pretty decent illustrator too. So
I said, well, okay.
And then I said to him, can you bring it the next day?
And that's how they roll, and you can't say no.
So he just went home and he created this beautiful design.
I was already busy with other stuff, but I did do her 3 drawings and then brought them back. And then we went into a huddle with her other pouako, and that was the one they chose.
So he created the tohorā, and then he did the whetū, which represented matariki.
And it is a whale dancing among the stars.
Another tauira, Rihi, helped convert Witi's design into a form that could be printed onto clothing. So, on the back of the kākahu of the 2024 Rumaki Reo akomanga, there's a tohorā standing on its tail, surrounded by whetū, stars, with kupu Māori around the edge. Whaia Shah didn't grow up speaking reo, but her tamaiti tuarua, her second son, was attending kohanga reo, literally language nest, with a kaiako kōrero Māori anake.
taku tamaiti tuarua I whakaroa hau me tuku ia ki te kohanga reo. Ka pai, I taua wā ka reo I te mohi o te reo Māori.
But her tamaiti would obviously make better progress if he could kōrero Māori at home too, ki tōna kāinga.
I mohi o hoki a hau I taua wā, mena ka tuku tērā tamaiti ki tērā kura kōrero Māori ka aha ia a te waka hoki mai ki te kāinga. Well, how do we help him at home?
And one day, tētahi rā,
Wiramu brought a pamphlet home and it had te wānanga takiura. Ako te reo Māori I roto I tētahi tau.
Learn te reo Māori in just 1 year. In the end, Shah actually applied for Takiura's 3-year degree course. She would train to become a kaiako.
So the first year was very, very difficult. I didn't really understand anything, but would record everything and then go home and look up all the kipu and try and understand.
She graduated, then taught at other kura, then returned to Takiura as a kaiako. 2024 is her 3rd year teaching rumaki. Being a kaiako reo Māori, it's about teaching grammar and vocab, but it's about much more than that. Some tohorā, especially tohorā Māori, especially older tohorā Māori, they're seeking something that's missing. The reo tāwhito, the language of their ancestors, has been lost, stolen, from one generation to the next.
Te tino hiakai, he kōwhao I roto I te ngākau.
So there's a great hunger in them for the reo. There's a kōwhao, a hole in their heart.
And I can play a part to help. Ka mirimiri tērā kōwhao.
Mirimiri. The online Māori dictionary, Te Aka, translates that as to massage or to soothe. And so, I ira, day after day, the haerenga of the rumaki reo akomanga unfolds. Always ngā kupu hau, new vocabulary, and always another whakapuaki looming on the horizon. Whakapuaki tuarua, number 2, is te kau meneti, 10 minutes long. Once again, we don't manage to get in to observe Witi's whakapuaki firsthand, but ke te pai. Because we're soon back in Shah's akomanga for another morning's lesson. Once again, sitting at the back with Papa Witi. Today's kaupapa,
Matariki me ana tamariki.
Matariki, as all New Zealanders know, especially since we got a new public holiday to mark it, is the constellation that comes into view mid-year but marks the start of the Māori lunar calendar. And some New Zealanders will also remember that in 2024 something slightly weird happened just before Matariki. When the invitations to official celebrations went out, the Culture Minister, Paul Goldsmith, made edits to the email that had been drafted for him to send to Australia's Culture Minister. Goldsmith demanded that in this invitation to an event marking the Māori New Year, Māori words be removed. So, tēnā koe, whoever, became dear whoever. The sign-off nāku noa nā became yours sincerely. And the word Aotearoa, the Māori name of the country, that was removed entirely. In Whaia Shah's class, though, she's leading a Q&A, I te reo Māori, about te kāhui whitu o Matariki, the constellation of Matariki. First up, who even is Matariki?
Kōrero mai te tahe, ko waia Matariki. Kōrero poto noiho.
E aiki e te he koia te māma o ngā whetū o te kāhui o Matariki.
Rawe, ka pai. Ko ia te māma o te kāhui whetū. Ka pai?
Tika, correct. Matariki is also the name of the māma of the kāhui whetū. And the other stars, ko ana tamariki. They're her children.
Ngā tamariki.
The whiteboard behind Shah is covered with kupu Māori relating to Matariki. The names of the months, the word makariri, because it's getting colder, rāpoto, pōroa, short days, long nights, and she's asking ngā tohorā for some of the other signs in nature, ngā tohu o te taiao, that tell us ngā huru, autumn, is coming. I'll let the tape run here for a bit, and if you start getting lost, don't panic. Just imagine that you are a tohorā o rumaki reo, working hard to keep afloat in a sea of reo Māori. And we'll see you on the other side.
Pea te tahi, āhuatango te taiao, ka mōhu, kua tai mai te ngahuru.
Ka tini ngā tai o ngā rau.
Ka tini ngā tai o ngā rau. Hea ha atu, Ka pai, ngahuru, kei te kōrero ngahuru ni, he aha atu, ka aha te tai ao, ka tohu kia tātou, ko tēnei kua tau ki te kaupeka o te ngahuru. He aha atu.
Tērā te wā te tiki ngā hua whenua, ngā kua rākau, mai te whenua, mai ngā rākau.
Ka pai.
So you just heard one tohorā saying in autumn the leaves change, and another saying Nahuru is a time to gather crops and fruit. And then Shah brings it home. The point she wants to make is that ngā tohu o te taiao, the signs in nature that tell us where we are in the Māori calendar, the maramataka, they're exactly the same signs that the ancestors, ngā tūpuna, used to read. So the maramataka isn't about time as dictated by your watch or your smartphone. Instead, it's written in the sky, the land, and the sea.
Koinei te maramataka Māori e te whānau, ka pai. Koinei ngā tohu, ka tohu ki ngā tūpuna, ka mōhio. E hari te mea ka titiro ki te wāti, e hari te mea ana e whae Shah, e whakarite te wā, ka pai, you got 1 minute to talk, so I set my phone, kao, ka mahi te tai ao. Nō rei, koinei hoki te hono ne, hono te rangi, ka pai, ki te whenua, me te moana, ka pai, tuia ki te rangi, tuia ki te whenua, tuia ki te moana. Nō reira, ko era mea tapa tōru, ka pai, koinei ngā tohu e hāngai ana ki te maramataka Māori.
Matariki will also be the kaupapa of the next whakapuaki, which will be 15 minutes long, Te Kau Mā Rima Meneti. And you guessed it, we couldn't make it into class to see Witi deliver that one either. But just like seasons, there's always another phase of the takiura syllabus just round the corner. And so, on a drizzly Tuesday morning, Eugene and I make a rendezvous with the akomanga rumaki, somewhere completely different.
Kia ora, Papa Witi. Kia ora. How you doing?
We've all met up in Ngāruawāhia in the Waikato, and we're outside the Tūranga Waiwai marae, caught up in a sea of hundreds of manuhiri, visitors, who'll be welcomed onto the marae by the haukainga, our Tainui hosts.
I was here in 1949 was my first time. Wow. I'm that old.
Because this year, like every year, tohorā from Takiura have driven to the Waikato to mark the anniversary of the Koronehana, the coronation of the Māori king, Kingi Tūhetia Pōtātou Te Wherowhero Te Tuawhitu. This is day 4 of a week of celebrations. We don't know it at the time, of course, but this will be the last time the Koronehana hui will be in honour of Kingi Tūhetia. He died just 10 days later. Moi mai rā e te rangatira. He has since been succeeded by his daughter, Ngā Waihono i te pō, as the Kīngitanga leader. But today, there's no sense that this is the end of anything. Rather, it's a joyous, high-energy and frequently political event full of haka, whai kōrero and waiata.
See you later, Auntie.
Some of it before we've even got inside. The Kīngitanga movement has existed for 166 years, and Witi's had connections to it for 75 of those years. Like we heard him say earlier, he was first here in 1949, aged about 5, when the leader was Kingi Koroki, the man he was just singing about. Witi grew up on the East Coast, but he says that his iwi, Ngāti Porou...
It's a Ngāti Porou used to bring a huge party. Kia ora. Hey, te pai tēnei rā.
Sorry, the finer details of Ngāti Porou connection with Tainui and the Kingitanga are going to have to wait. Witi's just bumped into a fellow tohorā from Takiura, which is something that'll happen all day as I trot along beside him. Witi seems to know everyone from Takiura. Also, seeing I'm standing next to him with a microphone, Witi sort of shifts into podcast producer mode, conducting his own interviews with his hoa akomanga.
So, going to Takiura is an entire experience, eh? It's not just learning the language.
Oh, absolutely.
This is Denza, who gets chatting to Witi in the crowd outside the main marae entrance. while a passing shower pelts down on our shared umbrella.
We've been learning haka, we've been learning waiata. We had noho marae.
Absolutely. If you remember Papa Tawhiri said at the very beginning, this is not a te reo course, it's a te ao Māori experience.
Denza is another one of the relative old-timers doing the course, so he's appreciated having Witi around.
Well, it's been an absolute privilege to meet this young man.
Yeah.
Also waiting for the pōwhiri is Lachlan. He actually is a young man.
Lachlan Kerr, and my akomanga is Te Apopo, which is the younger kids.
Lachlan's in a different class from Witi, but it's still grumake reo. He came to Tāmaki Makaurau from Australia to do the takiura course.
I studied law at university, so I was hoping to do something towards helping my iwi, Ngāti Manipoto, Waikato Hāti.
So are you coming back to takiura?
Kauri mohio, a kini pēr. He tino tata ki te mutunga o te tauno there. I don't have a lot of time to decide, but we'll see. But I'm just lucky to be here and to be with these wonderful people.
Witi interviews Lachlan a little longer, but the pōwhiri is really getting underway. It's time to head in.
Kia ora.
Later, Witi and the rest of us are in seats looking onto the marae ātea, soaking up the whai kōrero, the waiata, the haka. And as I learn later, Witi's not going unobserved. Here's Shah.
So when we went down to the koroneihana, Papa Witi was sitting in front of me and down a bit. I was sitting there with my son, Tomarangi. Anyway, Papa Witi was sitting there. His head was sort of tilt and his eyes were closed and he was smiling. So, kei te whakarongo ia. He's just taking in the kōrero. My son, so he's 11, he says to me, Mama, te tiro ki tērā kraua. Ko te ahu nei, tino pai tēnei kōrero ki aia. He says, Mum, look at that old man over there. He likes the kōrero. I said, ai, kei te moe o kōwai tērā? And he says, no. And I said, oh, that's Papa Witi. So I give him my cell phone. I said, here, have a look, kōwai ia. So he has a look on the cell phone and he goes, oh, ko ia te mea ka mahi te rail rider. I said, ai, koera Papa Witi. Ka pai, ka miharo taki tamaiti, that's the man that wrote Rail Rider. And then I look at my son and I say to him, do you know what? He said, hea ha mama, ki roto i e toka akomanga. Oh no, true. I said, aye. And then he says, actuals. So, aye. Kāre e whakapono ki ahau. He goes, how, mama? So I just left it.
The manuhiri at the koroneihana include representatives from the nations of Te Moana Nui Akiwa, the Pacific.
PG is here with us. Niue is present, Your Majesty. Tokelau stands with you today.
Which means that some of the speeches are in Pasifika languages whose shared roots with te reo Māori are only 1,000 years old or less, with the uncanny result that you'll hear a snatch of speech and you think you're kind of following, before you realise what you're hearing isn't even te reo Māori at all.
No Tahiti.
Yeah, like he said, he's from Tahiti, and that's what Tahitian sounds like. Witi talked about it later, over an impressively noisy brass band.
My father said to me once that he only wished that it was the same missionary who had gone from island to island to island to interpret what they were saying, because if it had been the same missionary rather than different ones, we would have a more unified language in the Pacific. And I firmly believe that. And so for us, in fact, learning te reo is learning the language of the Pacific.
Later, as we're stretching our legs, Witi keeps bumping into and interviewing more of his hoa akomanga no takiura.
Why did you come to learn the language at this age?
To try and support the taumata at my marae. That was my
This is Taite Makane. He's 63, and he and Witi agree that as you age, it gets harder to hold on to new kupu.
I find that I can't remember the whai kōrero, you know. And to be a good whai kōrero, I think you have to have a quiver of tauparapara, of whakatauki, of kaupapa, waiata, and I don't. I have a few.
Then Witi spots Rihi.
Rihi and I worked on doing the design and the kākahu.
Tohorā.
Yeah, it's Rihi who worked with Witi to get that tohorā and whetū design into a form that could be printed on Takiura's 2024 kākahu. She admits she was slightly starstruck to be studying alongside him.
That's all of us tauira, like, Witi, what? God, can't be.
Then just after that, as Witi and I are grabbing coffees from a stall across the road...
Oh, the girl has just gone past with the...
The Takiura sweatshirt?
Oh, the Takiura...
And the long hair?
I must go and ask her to come over here and say some few words about it, shall I?
Yeah, why not? In fact, there's a whole crew from Takiura, most of them wearing the tohorā kākahu created by Witi and Rihi.
Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora.
Ko Adam tōku ingoa.
Oh, kia ora Adam. Ko te amo tōku ingoa.
Ko Wiki tōku ingoa. Ko Carmel.
Carmel. Kia ora.
Ko Elise tōku ingoa.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Witi is still in interviewer mode,
Is Takiura the bridge?
asking Elise, Wiki, Te Amo and Carmel for their impressions of Rumaki Reo.
When you come from a background where you have no reo, I only knew like tahirua, toriwha, te takau, and to where I am now, I can kōrero i te reo Māori, I know my pepea off by heart, my whakapapa.
I grew up with older siblings that all went to kura kaupapa Māori, so kua hau te tangata kei te haere ki te mainstream kura and all that stuff, so it's real cool coming here and actually learning so much more.
It fries my brain some days. Sometimes I just need to go home and close all the curtains and let all the reo try to sink in.
I feel like I'm really lucky that I'm doing it young, because this is the thing that I need to move forward. I'm learning that it's going to be like a lifelong haerenga, yeah. But kei te pai, I'm okay with that.
Witi is off mic here, but he dives back in, because young, old, it's kind of all the same.
The same. You know, I feel very lucky that I'm this old and being able to learn, and this is a lifelong journey. Right.
So good.
But remember, the reason Witi dragged them all over for this little hui was because of what's on the back of their hoodies, Witi and Rihi's kākahu design.
Could you turn around? And then could you explain the tohorā, the words there?
Ehara taku toa I te toa, taki tahi, engari taku toa he toa.
This is Carmel reading, and honestly, it's tricky because the words go in a full circle.
Taki mano, he Māori ahau, e noho Māori ana, ki tōku ao Māori, ko te ohonga ake o ōku moimoia, te pua...
It's upside down, it gets a bit harder.
Pua wai tanga o ngā whakaro e kore au e ngaro tōku reo rangatira, ko te marae, te tohu rangatira o te iwi, ko matariki, ahunga nui, riko riko maira, ohio mano mano, kātahi ko whakatau.
Beautiful, now translate it fluently at high speed.
Well, I mean, this part is saying that, you know, I'm not lost. I like the reo, I'm not lost with the reo of my rangatira.
We have a go at some communal translation and then try to remember the names of the matariki stars that surround the tohorā on the kākahu.
Waiti?
Kao tupuarangi. Tupuarangi, tupuanoku.
Waiti, waita.
And then, though it's hard to see because this is a podcast, somehow it morphs into everyone doing the Macarena dance while singing the names of Matariki and Tamariki.
Tupuanuku, tupuarangi, ko te kawa, hiwa I te rangi, ko te whānau o Matariki.
The tohorā hoodie is, well, just a hoodie. Yet there's something remarkable about the way Witi Underwater always manages to make, or to discover, or to recombine the stories and signs from his life, from his books, and from te ao Māori in ways that spiral through time and space. Matariki me ana tamariki, the stars that the tupuna would inspect for clues about the coming winter, like Whaasha said. That tohorā, the one who carried paikea from Hawaii to Whangārā, but who also came up the Hudson to visit Witi in New York. Now, te tohorā me ngā whetū have travelled together down to Tūranga Waiwai on the back of the kākahu that Papa Witi created with his hoa akomanga, down to the place where he saw his first koronehana hui 75 years ago and learnt a song about Kingi Koroki. And even when relocated to Tūranga Waiwai for the day, the learning and the whakawhanangatanga are still going strong for the tauira of Rumaki Reo.
I like to sit in the middle of the guitars.
Isn't it so much nicer there? Tino waiata, Papa.
Let me think. Oh, I love them all.
E haere akine, coming up in Witi Underwater, the haerenga reo of Takiura's founder.
Empty the potty, doors, windows, wood, vegetables. My Māori language is very elementary indeed.
The struggle of tauira to stay afloat in Rumaki Reo.
There's nothing that I can do about it, except say to myself, sorry.
We had a conversation with Papa Witi where he felt like he was struggling a little bit more than other people.
The deep roots of the fight to restore te reo in Aotearoa.
People only see the pictures of Hana going up the stairs with the box and the petition. What they don't see is the other story.
And the limits of being a fly on the wall.
I didn't want to have myself recorded with my damaged reo.
Ko Adam Darringahau, ko Maua, ko Eugene Bingham, ngā kaituhi me ngā kai whakaputa o tēnei kōnai ipurangi. Ko James Danzi te kai tito, ko Au te kai huahua oro, ko Andrew McDowell te kai pūkaha oro, ko Te Ao Mihia Tumai te mātanga reo, ko Pai Tāwhiti te kai karakia, ko Iana te Nahu Owen te kai kōmihana Māori ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa, ka nui te mihi ki te maungai pāho. Archive material supplied with the help of Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision and Getty. Thanks to Penguin for permission to use the extract from Witi's story Catching Up. Also, our thanks to South Pacific Pictures for permission to use the audio clips you heard from the movie Whale Rider. The haka kamate was composed by Te Rauparaha of Ngā Te Toa Rangatira. A, ko o mātou mihi nunui ki ngā rangatira, ki ngā kaiako, ki ngā tauira, o te wānanga takiura o ngā kura kaupapa Māori o Aotearoa. Wai hoki ki a Papa Witi I he maira.
Unuhia, unuhia. Unuhia te tapu o tēnei wānanga. Unuhia te tapu o ēnei kōrero. Unuhia te tapu o tua whakarere. Kia wātea, kia māma. Te tīnana, te wairua, te ngā kau, te whatumanawa. Kia puta ai ki te taha tika, kia puta ai ki te taha wātea. Kia puta ai ki te whaiao, ki te ao mārama. Tau mai te mauri.
Haumi e.
Hui e.
Tai ki e.